Hey everybody, Chad with Stellarbot. In this video, I am going to talk about the fundamentals of rhythm and show you how to put some strum patterns to those chords that you've been learning. So hopefully by this point you have gotten pretty good at those first chord shapes. If not, go back and watch the last video again and make sure that you're getting some good practice changing from one chord to the next. You don't have to have a ton of shapes down, but get those basic shapes down so that you can practice putting some chords to the strum patterns that I'm going to teach you in this video. So music is divided into chunks, both kind of when you listen to it and on paper. So we call them bars or measures. So music is divided into measures or bars. It's just a way to group and organize music so that it's not just this complete random arrangement of notes. Because, you know, in order to have music, you got to put the notes to rhythm, and that way you can have a beat and a rhythm to go with it. So then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to assign a value to each one of those chunks, and these are kind of measured in time, by the way. So chunks or bars are measures. I'll call them bars because that's a shorter word. And we're going to assign a value to them. Most of the time, that value is going to be 4 beats or 4 counts. I'd say probably 90% of the stuff that you hear on the radio is played in 4, and that's why you can kind of count to 4. And when you're tapping your toe, snapping your fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Not all the time. You can have measures, bars that are measured in 3, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's kind of like your waltz kind of pattern. Don't hear a lot of that anymore nowadays. You can also have groups of 6, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you can have some really random ones like 5, 7, 9, 12. But most of the time, it's going to be 4. So we're gonna chunk our units of time, our bars, into groups of 4. So 4 beats. So then what we're going to do is we're going to kind of assign a name to different kinds of values that you can put to to those 4 beats. So, for example, if I was to set the speed of my song, which we call the tempo, we talked about that a while back, which is measured in beats per minute. So if I wanted to set my tempo, by the way, all these rhythm values are relative to how fast our song is going to be. So the next thing I'm going to do is say I want to set my speed about right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means 4 beats. If I was to just play a chord and let it ring out for 4 beats, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That is what we would call a whole note, because the chord, I'm letting it kind of ring out for the duration of the whole measure, right? So this is a little bit easier to see on paper. And then if I split that in half, then I'd have 2 beats and 2 beats. So I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Likewise, if I split that again, I would have 4 quarter notes. So a quarter note is kind of synonymous with the beat. So when we are tapping our foot or snapping our fingers at a certain speed, really what we're doing is we're tapping to the quarter note of each bar that we're going to do, which would be like this. Simple enough, right? So what we're actually doing though is we're strumming down, but then our arm is also coming back up in order to get ready for the next down strum. So in reality, we are actually strumming double the amount of counts that we're doing, or double the quarter note. So if you took a quarter note and we chopped it in half, and we called the first half the down strum and the second half the up strum, then we would call those eighth notes, right? So just like you take your pizza and you cut it in half this way, and then you quarter it in this way, and then if we do the diagonal, you end up with 8 pieces, and we call those eighths, right? Fractions, school, yay, education. So an eighth note is basically we can do 2 eighth notes for every beat. We can do a 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So if you pictured a bouncing ball, like a karaoke ball, but not bouncing to the words, but bouncing just kind of to that count, like. So the eighth note is going to bounce down, and it's also going to you're going to play a note when it's up in the air like that. And the way that we count it is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And in reality, this is what our arm is doing if we're taking a simple beat and we're strumming a quarter note. Really what we're doing is we are strumming, or rather removing our arm in an eighth note pattern. So this first strum that I'm going to show you is what I have come to term the eighth note strum pattern. So when you hear me refer to the eighth note pattern, this is kind of what I'm talking about. What we're going to do is we're going to basically move our arm in such a way that we are dividing the quarter note into its 2 respective eighth notes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to now add my up strum, so that I can actually include what we call the offbeats, or the upbeats you could say, into my strum pattern. That would look like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Make sense? So then the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to, once we get kind of comfortable with that motion. By the way, when we strum up, when you incorporate up strumming into your pattern, you don't actually have to strum all the way through your strings. If you just kind of aim for the 2 high ones, you'll probably get 3, and it's going to sound okay. Because if I strum all the way down and all the way up, it's going to just kind of sound too muddy, like I don't get any definition there. It's just kind of just sounds like a whole bunch of the same thing. So to kind of create a little bit of definition in our strum, what we can do is we can kind of do a full down strum and then like a partial up strum like that. And when I put that all together, so if you're tapping your toe at the same time, then basically you have this kind of invisible string connected to your toe from your hand. So imagine like a puppet master kind of pulling your foot up and down off the ground. The next thing we're going to do is, in order to create even more definition in our strum pattern, what we're going to do is we are going to remove some of those eighth notes, so to speak, in certain places, so that we can kind of create a pattern. Just like a drummer would play a drum beat, we can kind of, in a way, acoustic guitar in particular is a very rhythmic instrument. We can kind of create our own drum beat, so to speak, just by including and omitting certain beats or certain spots of that 4 count. And what I mean by that is, first things first, I will take out the upbeat of the first one, and then let's see, if I go 1, 2, there we go. So I'll just take out the first eighth note, and what I'll end up with is a down, down, up, down, up, down, up, or in other words, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and, right? So the and of beat 1 is still in there. We're just not going to include it in our strum pattern. So you see where I'm going with this? And there's not really any hard, fast rules about what you can include and what you shouldn't include, but there are kind of, what I've found is there are certain places where you take beats out and leave them in to make them sound better or more rhythmic. I would definitely strongly recommend playing your very first downbeat, just because that first downbeat is usually when you do your chord change, and that is going to kind of set the tone for the rest of that bar. So, but we can kind of play with the rest of the measure, the rest of the pattern, and kind of mix and match by taking certain strums out and putting other ones in. And so if I take out the and of one, and say one, and say let's take out beat 3 as well. So let's take out a downbeat, and so that would actually leave me with 2 up strums in a row, which is going to feel really weird when you do that for the first time, really unnatural. But the effect is going to be kind of cool. So if I take out the and of 1 and then beat 3, I'm left with this: 1, 2, and 4, and 1, 2, and 4, and. Starting to sound a little cooler, right? Some more definition in that strum pattern. So what you could do is, once you kind of get that pattern down, and you can, I'm just using this as an example one, although this is a pretty popular pattern, even just in its kind of basic form, and you can do variations of it. So if I kind of speed it up a little bit, then you can kind of start to hear different things you can do with it. So what I'll do is I'll kind of I'll strum on a G chord, and then maybe throw in a few extra chords just so we can kind of make a little bit of music here. So that's 2 measures for each chord before changing to the next one. So 1, 2, and 3, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can kind of imagine that if you had a drummer playing with you, he'd be doing something like. So it's kind of cool. You can kind of be your own drummer, and this works particularly well if you're just like a solo guitar player or maybe a singer-songwriter, and you don't have a drummer. You can sort of be your own drummer in a sense. Alright, so that is the 8th note strum pattern. As you can kind of tell, the 8th note strum pattern works pretty well for medium to fast songs. And the reason for that is, if we slow our tempo down so much, the slower we get, the slower our arm is moving. So if my tempo was something, you know, like a slow ballad, like that, then my arm would be moving at this speed. That's super boring, right? But the more I speed it up, if I'm, you know, kind of around this speed, you can kind of get to that tempo where I was doing the kind of the intro chords for Radioactive by Imagine Dragons, which was. So you can kind of have some fun playing around with that, practice doing different chord changes, or maybe coming up with your own chord progression. I've provided a few songs down below, and you can kind of play around with those. Coming up, I am going to show you how to double our pattern relative to the tempo, and come up with a pattern that's going to work well for slower songs, and we're going to call that the 16th note divided pattern.